everyone, I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. President-elect Trump is increasing pressure to back and win backing for his choice for Attorney General. That's Matt Gaetz. Trump is calling Republican senators to push that pick, even as he holds in his possession the threat or the request to make recess appointments to his cabinet. And things could be getting, or prepare to be getting, a little bit more difficult for Gaetz. Here's why. CBS News has learned, quote, an unknown and unauthorized third party, unquote, has gained access to witness depositions tied to the various investigations into Gaetz. And we're also following new developments in Trump's hush money case, which ended, of course, in his convictions. The Manhattan District Attorney says he has agreed to at least postpone, or at least think about postponing sentencing in that matter. Nancy Cordes and Finn Gomez join us now. So it's not often, but occasionally I'm allowed to leave this bureau and venture up to Capitol Hill. I did so this morning, and I will tell you this. Senate Republicans, I think, can be fairly described about this matter, Matt Gaetz as Attorney General, as squeamish.
And yet...
Not eager to take questions, not eager to get into the revelations and the process. They're just like, give us a minute, give us a minute. There'll be a process, we'll get to it. But I would say squeamish and scurrying is the way to describe them.
And you know who's not giving them a minute is Donald Trump himself, because he is making calls. Given. He is not giving them a single minute. He is making calls himself, we're told, to senators to gauge their interest.
Many of them have already said that on camera. Yeah.
His vice president is
going up there tomorrow,
making calls, going up there
with
on Gaetz's behalf. Gaetz himself is plowing full steam ahead. So even though there are a number of Senate Republicans who say, we're not comfortable with this pick, they're plowing ahead as if there's still a chance this could happen.
And it's, Finn, becoming somewhat evident, I would say somewhat, that there is at least a measure, I'm not sure exactly how deep it is, of Senate Republican curiosity about the contents of this House Ethics Committee report that was being prepared to be released and would have been released had Matt Gaetz not suddenly resigned from the House of Representatives. What's your take on that, and what effect, if any, that might have on the confirmation process?
If you look at it all, if you look at it from a bird's eye perspective, it looks like there's been some coordination here. I think there's been some strategic effort, not only through the Hill, the resignation, the timing of the resignation, the pick itself, which is causing, as you said, and as you saw on the Hill today, just a lot of distraction, I think. I think it is a strategic distraction by
What's the strategy? Break that down.
I think part of it's political, right? Even if he goes down, it's like a win-win.
Even if he's not confirmed.
Even if he's not confirmed, and again, from squeamish senators, I think what it can do is that it can distract from some of Donald Trump's other picks, but also it puts pressure on the Senate, right? On these Senate Republicans. In a time when he's coming here with a mandate, right? He's saying that, and also if you look at some of these senators, including like Tom Tillis from North Carolina, he's up in 2 years, right? So his MAGA base has already said on Twitter and on other platforms, we're coming after you
if you don't vote to confirm.
Exactly.
Expect a primary challenge.
And if he doesn't, he can say he can have that political cover to say, look at what's happening, and push through with his other potentially controversial picks there.
Finn used the phrase bird's eye view. Let's take it a little bit higher, Nancy. I'm a journalist of a certain age. I remember when a nominee for Attorney General could be eliminated like that for failing to properly pay taxes for a nanny.
Right.
At minimum, at the most generous and deferential characterization of Matt Gaetz and his partying, he routinely attended parties in which women barely over the age of consent were present, they were paid to have sex with them, and drugs were present. That sounds to me a little bit more disturbing for the chief law enforcement officer of the federal government than failure to pay your nanny taxes, and yet we are considering this with some due seriousness.
And he's not the only nominee who is dealing with allegations, perhaps not this serious, but allegations of sexual misconduct. And I think this leak that you saw today in what is a civil defamation case, including a deposition from a 17-year-old girl who says that Gaetz had sex with her, I think what it shows is that whether or not this House ethics report is released, it's going to make its way to senators one way or another.
Yes.
This information is going to get out there.
And the potential for the accusers to their names to be identified. Frankly, we don't know who this third-party person is.
No, no. And you mentioned this idea of strategy. It's now almost become a cliche, Finn, to describe this confirmation process initiated by President-elect Trump as flooding the zone,
right,
as putting lots of different people who, were they only the one who was controversial, may not be confirmed. But many others might, to your point, get confirmed, even if one, maybe two, isn't.
No, absolutely. And I think that...
And transition officials don't necessarily agree to that, but they don't aggressively deny that there's a strategy there.
But you know, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck, man. It is a duck, and I think that's what you're seeing here. The other part of this is, Major. I do think that if Donald Trump were to pull a nomination, right, at this point, this is, as you know, you've covered him for a long time. This is not a man who ever acknowledges a mistake or an apology, or offers an apology, right? It's a sign of weakness for him. So he's not going to do that. From even if it's in swirling in controversy, he's just not. That's something that he is not expected to do.
He'll get credit for trying to push the system as hard as he pushed it, whether or not Matt Gaetz is confirmed or not.
And increases political capital with the base that helped him win.
Right. Finn Gomez, Nancy Cordes, always a pleasure. Thanks so much. I want to get now to that ruling, or the procedural things that went down today in New York. Jessica Levinson joins us now to discuss what developed today in terms of the prosecutors and what they said about the future of the criminal conviction of now President-elect Trump. Jessica Levinson, what's your take on what happened today and what its bottom line meaning is?
The bottom line here is we have the first judge in the country who's facing the question of what do you do when you have a president-elect who's a convicted felon? And when there are still questions in this case, we have Judge Merchan, a state court judge, the first judge, as far as we know, in our nation's history to ever face this specific question. Or I should say, we certainly do know. And the question is, we have a conviction. And what do we do about this? Because this is not a conviction of Donald Smith, right? It's a conviction of Donald Trump. And so what does it mean in terms of whether or not the case will be dismissed outright, which is certainly what the Trump team wants, whether or not sentencing will include only a penalty and not incarceration, which is certainly a middle ground, or whether or not sentencing will be delayed until after the next Trump administration. All of these questions, we've never been here before. So that's what's happening today. I think the next thing, Major, that will happen is there will be motion practice, not just the letters that we've seen, but there will be motions filed by both sides, and then there'll be a hearing.
And Jessica, for our audience who might be saying, can you just wake me when we know the answers to these questions? When would we might be able to wake them to say, I mean, this has to be resolved before January 20th, does it not?
Yes. I mean, in some ways, no resolution is a resolution.
Is a resolution, exactly.
But yes, Major, you're exactly right. So there has to be some sort of resolution. I think what we're looking at here, and let's remember that we're still waiting on Judge Merchan to say whether or not that Supreme Court immunity decision that we've talked about has any bearing on this case, and whether or not any of the facts that served as the basis of the conviction were official acts such that they would be subject to presidential immunity. So let's put that to the side. When can we wake people? I would say in December. Let's be clear that there'll be motion practice. The judge will make a decision, and I expect there will be one of two options in all seriousness. One will be there will be a sentencing before January 20th, and it will include no jail time. The other is we will just push everything until after the next administration.
And Jessica, a serious question. Based on your reading of the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity, do you think you could plausibly argue, as an attorney for President-elect Trump, that signing these checks, which were then misidentified, and that was the criminal act that the jury found the president guilty of, while in office, checks that were in order to pay off Stormy Daniels, does that fall under the Supreme Court's definition, broadly speaking, of official acts?
So, in my view, that is not a strong argument. You can certainly make the argument, but just because you're signing checks in the Oval Office does not mean that it's an official act. And we know the whole theory behind the hush money payment trial, Major, is that it was election interference. It was candidate Trump, not President Trump, but candidate Trump trying to bury a negative story about him in the lead up to the election. And what we have here is then candidate Trump becoming President Trump and essentially finalizing the payments while he was in the Oval Office. Not everything you do in the Oval Office is official conduct. I mean, let's say you have a conversation with your chief of staff even about where you want to go out for dinner. It's in the Oval Office, it's with your chief of staff, but that's private conduct. So in my view, it's not a strong legal argument to say this verdict should be tossed based on that immunity decision.
Clear, concise, and always precise on the law. Jessica Levinson, thank you very much. Still to come, FEMA's administrator is defending the agency on Capitol Hill as federal funding deadlines loom. We'll break down that and what's at stake next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Good to have you with us. The head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency testified before the House Oversight Committee today about the response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton and the future of funding for the agency, which, to put it mildly, is strapped for cash right now. At least one FEMA employee, this is worth noting, was fired earlier this month after that worker was accused of denying aid to homes with Trump lawn signs. On the Hill, Administrator Deanne Criswell discussed it.
My senior leadership team provided me with this visual evidence that the employee had, in fact, issued these instructions, and they recommended that this employee be terminated, and I concurred and directed the termination of this employee. I released a statement that day, and I will repeat what I said to all of my employees and the American people. This type of behavior and action will not be tolerated.
CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins me now. Scott, it's great to see you as always. The most important part of our conversation is where is funding for FEMA? How much is requested? What is Congress's current disposition toward that?
It's a mess right now, but to be clear about that clip we just played, about the FEMA administrator being asked several times in several different ways about that rogue employee, it felt like a proxy battle over something quite different. What Republicans tried to do today, and they laced their opening statements with the argument, is try to make a case that the federal government has too many people who are, in their words, unaccountable, who aren't directly reporting to the president, and that they may need to change that in a Trump administration. We all have heard the Trump administration is going to be keen on shaking up how Washington works, including the civil service, including how federal agencies function. And this felt like just the foreshadowing of an argument that's to come in January, that maybe we need to change how things like FEMA function from soup to nuts, from top to bottom. We'll put that aside and talk about the money, because FEMA is short on cash.
That this one employee could be representative of an entire problem that must be wrestled to the ground.
That it justifies wrestling that problem to the ground, and not just at FEMA. I mean, you could just feel the fingerprints of the Trump loyalists and the Trump soon-to-be administration on this congressional hearing today, that he wanted to talk about the bigger macro issue, about money. FEMA is running short on money. The Small Business Administration, which provides the loans to homeowners and businesses who are in the hurricane zone, is flat out of money in its loan program. All these other agencies are stretched by not just hurricanes, but by wildfires, by tornadoes, by the other things that have happened in the past few months. There'll be a hearing tomorrow in the U.S. Senate Appropriations Committee about getting some money out the door soon to deal with a problem that should have been dealt with in September and October. The hearing will not culminate with a new bill tomorrow. It'll still take weeks to put pen to paper. It may take until December 20th to pass this legislation. And one senator from North Carolina, Ted Budd, explained why that may be just a little too late.
We want it done yesterday, and we're going to keep pushing it with urgency to make sure that those dollars come quickly and they get spent in the right way.
Might this have to wait till December 20th?
We sure hope not, but again, we're going to be pushing it, using our relationships in the U.S. House and here in the Senate to make sure we're clearing through all obstacles and objections, and we get it to Western North Carolina as quickly as possible.
Hey, Major, here's the bottom line. This disaster funding problem, this shortfall, was a problem in October. Congress decided to punt this until after the election, which they've done, and now they're slow out of the gates, and that's bothering people.
And December 20th is relevant. Why?
That's the deadline for the next government shutdown. It's the deadline for when Congress has to pass new funding for the government itself. They think that's the only bill that'll get out of Washington that this disaster money can hitch a ride to. Otherwise, you're at a stalemate on most other things.
So either you roll this money up into that, or it waits until the next Congress and an uncertain future, to put it mildly.
That's right. And what's more, the Republicans may want to punt deeper into next year, the next time they have to deal with this, because they want to give President-elect Trump some runway to do other things and not get mired in this mess right off the bat.
Scott McFarland, always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Can Matt Gaetz make it through a Senate confirmation as Attorney General? That's one question on the minds of many senators. One Republican senator told me he wouldn't bet his house on it or my house on it. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Sources tell CBS News the House Ethics Committee will meet tomorrow as it faces pressure to release its report on Matt Gaetz. Today, I and many other reporters, I want to emphasize, tried to take the temperature on Capitol Hill about the former congressman's chances of making it through Senate confirmation.
How would you assess his chances right now?
I have no idea.
All right, thank y'all. We've got to go.
I have no idea. You know, if
50-50?
I wouldn't bet my house on it one way or the other. And if I were betting your house, which would be a lot easier, I have to say I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of I don't knows on Capitol Hill this morning, I can tell you that for sure. Kadia Goba and Braxton Booker join us now. Kadia is a political reporter for Semaphore. Braxton is a national political correspondent for Politico. So, Kadia, I'll just start with you. There are other issues for Matt Gaetz. He has called all those who have either pled guilty or been convicted over January 6th crimes, all of them political prisoners. He said right after January 6th that those weren't even Trump supporters. That was Antifa. He has talked about getting rid of the FBI, the ATF. There are lots of issues other than what is before the House Ethics Committee, and yet we are still looking at this as a seemingly credibly potential Attorney General.
Sure. I think one thing to point out is that everything you just pointed out is a benefit. Well, actually, is probably the reason that he was nominated
in the first place.
In the first place by Donald Trump. So yeah, I mean, senators are going to face a crossroads here. They're going to have to determine whether or not they are going to give the nomination or the nod to this person who I'm positive that this report will come out, this damning report,
which
alleges, some improprieties on his part with sexual improprieties with regards to women, or young women at that, and whether or not they are going to coalesce around the incoming president. And it's going to be not easy for people running for 2026, I'll add, and just at large. The Senate, he has a grasp on many of Republicans.
And Braxton, it was my sense on Capitol Hill and in conversations that the first sort of thing that Senate Republicans had to get over and get clear on was, are you serious, President-elect Trump? Is this real? And he's like, yes, it's real, and I want it. And you're going to have to vote yes or no, and it's not going to be pleasant.
Well, I think that's also part of the mandate that the president-elect feels like he's coming into Washington with, right?
Testing it very early.
Well, look. I mean, let's not forget during the first assassination attempt, what did he do? He got up and said, "Fight, fight, fight." Right. So I think that he is taking that fight now to Senate Republicans and saying, like, I dare you to fight me on this because this is going to put you in a difficult position, and you may not have my support going into 2026. So he's feeling probably the biggest and baddest he's ever felt as president coming into this nomination process.
To what effect does President-elect Trump's relationship with Speaker Mike Johnson have on the Speaker's very public pronouncements that this Ethics Committee report should not see the light of day.
Yeah, so that was shocking for a lot of people, especially Democrats who thought that Speaker Johnson would kind of lay low and not intervene. But he kind of flew in the face of his House Republican counterparts on the Senate side, Senate Republicans, because they explicitly, many of them said explicitly that they wanted to see the report. He comes out,
relevant
he said,
information.
All I could look at is, this has been a long road for Speaker Johnson. For the past 6 months, he has been courting Donald Trump. He's had visits to Mar-a-Lago, and we saw that reciprocated in last week when Donald Trump came to a private meeting and gave his full-throated support for Speaker Johnson to become Speaker.
And Kadia, catch our audience up on something that has changed in the mechanism by which in the future someone wants to vacate the speakership. What's the voting threshold now? Because it's different.
So this was very important. This was something negotiated between the moderate flank and the very conservative flank. So
of House Republicans.
Of House Republicans. It used to be 9 members of it used to be one member of Congress that could just pull a vote, bring a vote to the floor, and oust the Speaker. Now they've decided on 9 members of Congress, which is an interesting number because it's one more than the 8 that ousted Kevin McCarthy.
At least people can add past 8. Bracken, you are also tracking the sort of Democratic sorting through the rubble of this election.
Yeah.
There's going to be a new chair of the Democratic National Committee. What do you know?
Well, look, right now, the Democrats are trying to plot their way back from the devastating losses 2 weeks ago. There are a couple of people who have thrown their names out there, kind of trial balloons to see whether or not they can get the necessary support from the members of the DNC. We heard that Martin O'Malley, the former governor of Maryland, was the first one out there. There's also someone that CBS confirmed that is considering a place in throwing his hat in the ring, and Chuck Rocha, somebody who worked for the Bernie Sanders campaign.
He's been at this table many times.
And he's well known within party circles. He's saying, like, too many white men are throwing their hat in the ring. They need to mix it up a little bit. Look, I think this is going to be a long, kind of drawn-out fight, and there's certainly at the beginning stages of this. And there are some regional battles that I think are going to show themselves.
There's going to be names, regions, but based on your reporting, Bracken, is there a sense of direction that either can be assessed or that people are talking about?
Look, I think right now, the two things are clear, that Democrats want somebody who's going to do this full time. They do not want somebody who's an elected official who's going to be splitting their time trying to rebuild the party. The other thing that's coming up is, like, they want somebody who's going to be a prolific fundraiser, and somebody who, one Democratic operative said, they need to be a wartime general. They need to be able to go out there and take the Democrats' fight to Republicans. As you know, Democrats are going to be shut out of all federal levels of power in the next couple of years.
Not only take the messaging to Republicans, but to constituencies that wandered away from the Democratic Party conspicuously in this election. Kadia Goba, always great to have you. Bracken Booker, so great to have you. Thanks for being with us. Our next guest calls the presidential transition, quote, the point of maximum vulnerability for our country. And it appears that President-elect Trump is holding up this process due to concerns about a mandatory code of ethics. More on that ahead. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. There are several reports President-elect Trump has not yet submitted a legally required ethics pledge vowing to avoid conflicts of interest after taking the oath of office. According to the Presidential Transition Act, this pledge was required to be submitted by October 1st. Max Stier joins us now to dig into all this. He is the founding president and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service. It's great to have you with us. How big a deal is this?
A very, very big deal. As you noted earlier, the transition is fundamental to the safety of our country. It is the handoff of power, and at the point of handoff is when our enemies abroad and other risks are most prominent. So doing this right is really critical to, again, keeping us safe, and frankly, also to the ability of a new administration to fulfill its promises from the campaign trail.
And Max, how about what we are told is a reluctance of President-elect Trump to do anything about his business holdings this second time around?
Well, look, again, I can't look into the transition operation and know for sure. But as you say, it's been reported that this is the sticking point. The reality is that transition activity is still private activity, but it's fundamentally so close to governance that making sure that there's transparency about who's involved and how the process is run is fundamental. This question of conflicts of interest is really critical to make sure that the people who are in an administration are there looking out for the public good and not their private interests. And I think the same issue applies to the President of the United States.
Max, I read with interest an op-ed piece you had in The Hill talking about the confirmation process of cabinet designees and others who serve in the administration. You had some eye-popping numbers that those subject to the Senate confirmation process number 1,300, that the process takes much longer than it used to and gobbles up more time than actual legislative votes. Walk me through some of that.
Absolutely. So again, there are about 1,300 of the 4,000 political appointees that a president makes that require Senate confirmation. I will add that 4,000 is more than any other democracy out there. Most democracies count political appointees in tens, not in thousands. It's a vestige of the spoil system. But the 1,300 is a huge number as well. And the Senate hasn't been successful in getting through that number in any real-time measure. And it means that they lose power and the executive winds up with acting officials rather than people who are full-time confirmed. I have to say that the proposition that President-elect Trump has made that the Senate should simply allow him to put his people through recess appointment is actually not the answer. The Constitution gives the Senate the very important responsibility of making sure that people who are appointed have the competence and character to be good appointees. So the better way is actually to make sure that only the top people require Senate confirmation. You could reduce that 1,300 by a lot and still not take a very bad road of recess appointments.
Max, I'm glad you brought that last point up because it's occurred to me that Senate Republicans who are kind of waffling around this question of recess appointments have within their ability to say to President-elect Trump, look, we're trying to make your nominees stronger by having them go through the confirmation process, not weaker, and hold the position on a temporary basis through a recess appointment.
Well, there's certainly that. And, it's the fundamental core of our system. We have a separation of power system. The framers were very clear. They did not want the president to have unlimited authority. They wanted to make sure the Senate would be a check to ensure that the people who are leading government agencies were, in fact, of good character and great competence. That's the Senate's job. And they'd be stepping away from that if they permitted recess appointments here. Again, there are things that should be done to fix the system. This is not one of them. You mentioned earlier the desire of President-elect Trump to shake things up. There's a big difference between shaking and breaking, and recess appointments would be breaking.
Indeed. Max Stier, thank you very much. Appreciate the time. Will the president-elect's relationship with the media be any different from the first term? That's on our minds, at least partially. Only time will tell, of course, but our next guest will discuss what we might expect. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. In the days leading up to the election, Donald Trump filed an FEC complaint against the Washington Post, reportedly sent a letter to the New York Times threatening legal action, and filed a lawsuit against ABC News earlier this year and against us, CBS News, last month. Now, after winning the election, President-elect Trump told Fox News he will be, quote, open and available to the press, unquote, unless he is, and this is another quote, not treated fairly. Max Tawney joins us now. He's a media editor for Semaphore. Max, good to have you with us. You know as well as I do, and I have lived experience with this, Trump loves and hates the media in equal measure, and they toggle back and forth. What do you think we ought to brace ourselves for in this incoming administration?
Well, it's a great question, and you know better than most people because you covered his first time in office. And I think it changes by the minute, and oftentimes it's both at once. I think that what we've seen, as you mentioned, in the past several weeks, Trump has resumed his litigious and also kind of the legal threats that characterized some of his first time in office. threatening the New York Times, threatening Penguin Random House, and of course, the lawsuit filed against CBS. So certainly we expect that Trump is going to continue his kind of no holds barred legal strategy against the press. At the same time, we also saw him meeting at Mar-a-Lago with the hosts of Morning Joe. He clearly reads the news. He pays attention to it more than pretty much anybody else. He is, of course, staffing his administration, hopes to staff his White House with people mostly from Fox, but folks who've appeared across media outlets. So I think it's a continued love-hate relationship. I think that this new administration, the new White House, wants to try to continue to build its relationships with alternative media, the podcasters, the so-called manosphere, some of the people who helped him propel him into office this time around. So I think we might see him experiment with that, but I think he is going to continue to play hardball with many of us in the more traditional media, the traditional press.
Max, what significance, if any, do you place in the nomination or the proposed nomination of Brendan Carr as FCC commissioner? He has a lot of support from Elon Musk and an overall orientation to the media that you would describe as?
Somewhat hostile, I would say. Maybe perhaps that's an understatement. It is hard to say what's going to happen. Obviously, the FCC, the way it's structured, there are multiple, it's meant to kind of balance a lot of different opinions from officials who are involved. Carr has expressed a desire to open up media ownership. He has expressed a desire to end Section 230, which has to do with free speech and what can be said on platforms, if I'm not mistaken, which actually in some ways would not benefit Elon Musk. A lot of things that are happening on his platform, I think, would be threatened by a change to that rule. So it's, like many things with Trump, it is very, very difficult to see what is going to happen, because it seems like some of the things that Carr has supported actually kind of cut against some of the things that are supported by other people who are in Trump's orbit, including Musk. So, TBD, I think.
Right. And just briefly, Section 230, the way it's written now, platforms are not held in any way legally accountable or responsible for things that appear on their platforms. That's not true of CBS News. That's not true of newspapers. And altering that would change the platform's approach to what their level of accountability or legal exposure would be to what appears on their platforms. That would be a big change.
I mean, it would change pretty much everything about our experience on social media. I think that it would open up a tremendous amount of legal risk for the major social media platforms. And I find it hard to believe that if they actually pursued this, they would be supported by Elon Musk. His platform really depends on the idea that he and Twitter X now cannot be held legally responsible for the things that folks like myself and others post on there. So I think it would be a very, very strange situation if they did indeed decide to pursue this, and I think it would be at odds with his interests. But you never know with Elon, and you certainly don't know all the time with Trump either.
And with about a minute left, Max, the president-elect has gone back and forth on TikTok. Any idea where that might land? Ban or no ban?
This is, again, purely speculative. Of course, many people remember that it was Trump's first administration, the first go-around, that explored a TikTok ban. In some ways, if you look at it, TikTok may have helped propel him into the presidency this time. He's got ties to folks who who both support and oppose it. I think it's too soon to tell. I think it's likely not going to happen. That's my read on the situation from talking to folks. But again, Trump is mercurial, and he changes his mind. He's completely flipped on this, and so it's possible that he could flip again.
Max Tawney with Semaphore. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.